There is a rock sitting on a windowsill in Catalonia, Spain. It is pink, translucent. It looks like rose quartz or a bar of soap worn smooth by years of use. It is salt. Not a symbol of salt, not a representation. An actual piece of a mountain made entirely of salt, the famous salt mountain of Cardona, from which Spanish noble families drew centuries of wealth. When it rains, the rock dissolves slightly and leaves a puddle of brine underneath it. When the sun hits the puddle, white crystals begin to form. You can watch salt being born in real time on a windowsill. This rock is a strange and useful thing to own, because it forces you to look at something you have ignored your entire life. Salt. You have it in your kitchen. You barely think about it. A kilogram costs less than a cup of coffee. But for most of human history, salt was one of the most valuable substances on Earth. Empires were built on it. Wars were fought over it. Revolutions were started because of it. And almost no one alive today has any idea. The salt we eat, sodium chloride, NaCl, is the product of a reaction between sodium, an unstable metal that can burst into spontaneous flame, and chlorine, a poisonous gas used as a chemical weapon in World War I. When these two deadly substances combine, they produce something essential to human life. Without sodium, the human body cannot transport nutrients, transmit nerve impulses, or move muscles, including the heart. An adult human contains about 250 grams of salt. The body cannot manufacture it, and it loses salt constantly through sweat, urine, and breath. We must replace it constantly, forever. This biological fact, simple, unavoidable, is the entire engine of human history as it relates to salt. But here is the strange thing. Salt deficiency does not cause a craving for salt. Unlike hunger or thirst, you do not feel it coming. You just get weaker, then dizzy, then dead. Early humans had no way to know this. All they knew was that salt made food taste better, and that without it, something went wrong. And so the search began. The oldest saltworks ever found is in China. In the northern province of Shanxi, there is a lake, Lake Yuncheng. Its waters evaporate every summer and leave behind flat white fields of salt crystals. Archaeologists have found human bones around this lake dated to before 6000 BC. Those people were there for the salt. Chinese historians are certain about one thing. The earliest wars in recorded Chinese history were fought over Lake Yuncheng. The mythical Yellow Emperor, Huangdi, is said to have presided over the first war ever fought over salt. This is not unique to China. Wherever salt exists in the ancient world, there are signs of conflict. A group discovers a salt source. They build their lives around it. Another group arrives and wants what they have. And so it begins. Salt did not just preserve food. It preserved civilizations. And like all things that preserve civilization, it was worth killing for. In 252 BC, in the province of Sichuan, a governor named Li Bing made a discovery that would change the world. He had noticed that the brine pools his workers used to make salt were seeping up from underground. He ordered his workers to dig down. They struck brine at 300 feet. These were the world's first drilled wells. But something strange happened as the workers went deeper. Sometimes men would become weak for no visible reason, lie down and die. Occasionally, an explosion would destroy an entire crew. The workers called it evil spirits. They were wrong about the name. They were right about the danger. What they had found, rising up through their wells alongside the brine, was natural gas. By 100 AD, the salt workers of Sichuan had learned to capture this gas, pipe it through bamboo tubes, and use it to heat their boiling houses. the sheds where brine was cooked down into salt crystals. This is the first recorded use of natural gas in human history. Salt made China, and China made modernity. The word salary comes from salt. What is certain is that Roman soldiers were deeply connected to salt. The word salarium, from which salary descends, appears in Roman records in connection with soldiers' pay. The Via Salaria, the Salt Road, was one of the oldest roads in Rome. Salt merchants used it to bring salt to Rome centuries before the city was an empire. Rome was built on salt trade. The city grew at the point where the Tiber River met the sea, precisely because ocean salt could be brought upriver, and inland salt could come down to the coast. The Roman Empire that followed spread salt-making techniques across Europe. Wherever Romans went, salt production followed, and wherever salt production went, cities grew. Salt appears in almost every religion on earth. In Judaism, salt is the eternal covenant itself. The Torah states it directly. It is a covenant of salt forever before the Lord. Every Friday night, Jewish families dip the Sabbath bread in salt before eating. Bread is God's gift. Salt is what keeps a promise from rotting. In Islam, salt seals a bargain for the same reason. Its essence cannot be destroyed. Dissolve it in water and it disappears, but evaporate the water and the same crystals return, unchanged. Salt does not lie. Salt does not decay. So salt became the symbol of a promise that will not decay either. Even now, in kitchens that have never heard any of these stories, people still throw spilled salt over their left shoulder. No one remembers why. The reflex survived, the meaning didn't. But Leonardo da Vinci remembered. When he painted The Last Supper, he placed a small overturned salt cellar directly in front of Judas Iscariot, spilled, wasted, broken. His audience did not need it explained. Betrayal has always smelled like spilled salt. In the early Middle Ages, a group of refugees fled to a cluster of muddy islands in a lagoon on the northeastern coast of Italy. They were running from barbarians. They had nothing except salt. The lagoon was perfect for salt production, shallow, warm, exposed to sun and wind. The refugees built salt pans, flat evaporation basins where seawater dried into crystals. They traded salt for everything they didn't have. Those refugees built Venice. By the 13th century, Venice controlled salt production and trade across the entire Mediterranean. They used salt as a strategic weapon, guaranteeing supplies to allies, cutting off enemies, using salt contracts to bind cities to Venetian political interests. Venice did not just sell salt, they weaponized it. When Chioggia, a competing salt-producing town nearby, threatened Venetian monopoly, Venice forced them to stop producing salt entirely and buy only from Venice, at Venice's price. This was not commerce, it was domination. And it worked for centuries because salt was not optional. You could choose your trading partner for silk or spices. You could not choose your trading partner for salt. The richest city in medieval Europe was built on a condiment. In France, for nearly 450 years, there was a tax on salt called the gabelle. It was not merely a tax on buying salt. It was a requirement to buy salt. Every French person above the age of 8 was required to purchase a minimum amount each year, whether they needed it or not, from government-controlled warehouses at government-controlled prices. The price varied wildly by region. This created an enormous illegal trade. Salt smugglers, faux sauniers, moved salt across regional borders under cover of night. Getting caught meant the galleys, or death. Between 1730 and 1740, French authorities arrested more than 2,300 salt smugglers. More than 300 were sentenced to death. The gabelle was one of the most hated laws in French history. When the Revolution came in 1789, the abolition of the salt tax was among the most celebrated acts of the new government. The French Revolution had many causes: bread prices, political exclusion, aristocratic excess. And salt. On March 12, 1930, a 61-year-old man in a white dhoti walked out of his ashram in Ahmedabad, India, and began to walk toward the sea. He walked for 24 days, 240 miles. By the time he reached the coastal village of Dandi, thousands of people were walking with him. On April 6, Mahatma Gandhi bent down to the beach, picked up a small clump of salt left by the tide, and held it up. It was an illegal act. The British Empire had declared that only the British government could produce and sell salt in India. Indians were required to buy salt from British warehouses at British prices. Salt they could have harvested themselves from the ocean, surrounding them on 3 sides. Gandhi had chosen salt deliberately, not as a symbol, as a weapon. Everyone needed salt. Everyone understood the injustice of being taxed on it by a foreign power. Within weeks, tens of thousands of Indians were illegally making their own salt on beaches across the country. The British arrested over 60,000 people. The world watched. The Salt March did not immediately end British rule, but it broke something: the idea that British authority was natural, inevitable, and just. 8 years later, India was free, and the first act of the independent Indian government was to abolish the salt tax. When the American Civil War began in 1861, the Confederate States of the South faced an unexpected crisis. Salt. The North had most of the salt production. The South had almost none, and without salt, meat could not be preserved, armies could not eat, and the war could not continue. Salt became a military target. Union forces systematically destroyed salt works whenever they found them. In 1862, Union troops raided the salt works at Saltville, Virginia, one of the largest in the Confederacy, and destroyed them. Civilians were told to dig up the floors of old smokehouses, where brine had dripped for decades, and boil the dirt to extract salt. Salt never won or lost a battle, but a lack of salt eroded the Confederate Army's ability to feed itself across 4 years of war. Salt, or the lack of it, shaped the outcome of the Civil War. Salt is not just a preservative, it is also a flavoring tool, and the most sophisticated use of salt as flavor is not sprinkling it on food, it is fermenting food in it. In ancient China, fish were packed in salt and left to ferment. Over centuries, Chinese cooks began adding soybeans to the fermentation. Eventually, the fish disappeared entirely. What remained was fermented soybeans and salt, the substance we now call soy sauce. In the 14th century, a Dutch fisherman named Willem Beukelzoon discovered something that changed northern Europe forever. He found that if you gutted and salted a herring at sea, immediately after catching it, the fish stayed edible for far longer than fish treated on shore. This sounds trivial, it was not. Before this discovery, herring had to be eaten or processed within hours of catching. After this discovery, Dutch fishing fleets could stay at sea for weeks. They salted millions of herring on board and came home with holds full of preserved fish that could be shipped across Europe and eaten months later. The Dutch became the dominant fishing power in northern Europe. Their salted herring trade funded the Dutch Golden Age, the same era that produced Rembrandt, Vermeer, and the Dutch East India Company. A discovery about how to gut a fish changed the balance of power in Europe. In 1810, a French chemist named Nicolas Appert discovered that food sealed in airtight containers and heated could be preserved indefinitely without salt. The tin can was born. 50 years later, a German chemist developed a method for extracting and concentrating meat. 50 years after that, refrigeration became widely available. In less than a century, The entire logic of salt as the world's essential preservative had been dismantled. Salt did not disappear. We still use 14,000 industrial applications for it, but it stopped being the center of civilization. The price of salt collapsed. Its strategic value evaporated. Empires built on salt control, Venice, the Habsburgs, the British in India, either adapted or fell. A substance that had driven human history for 10,000 years became a shaker on a kitchen table. Homer called salt a divine substance. Plato described it as especially dear to the gods. Today, a kilogram costs less than a cup of coffee, and most of us use it without thinking. But the story of salt is really the story of human civilization itself. It produced the first international trade routes, the first state monopolies, the first commodity taxes, the first commodity-driven revolutions. It built Venice. It helped break France. It was the weapon Gandhi used to crack the British Empire. And now it sits in a shaker on your table, costing almost nothing, and you ignore it entirely. Mark Kurlansky, who wrote the definitive history of salt, ended his book with a simple observation. In every age, people are certain that only the things they have deemed valuable have true value. Once, everyone knew that salt was the most important substance in the world. Then they forgot. We are still forgetting things, right now. The only question is what and how long before we remember.